What if I told you that 313 men with no armor, no horses, and barely any weapons faced an army 3 times their size, and won? That in the heat of battle, when death felt certain, the sky itself opened, and help came from the unseen? This isn't just a story of swords, it's a story of faith so strong, it made the impossible happen. But what really happened on that battlefield? And what secret did Allah reveal after the dust had settled that changed the way victory is understood forever? This is the story of the Battle of Badr. Please help us like this video and keep commenting to help us create more contents for you. If you're ready, let's get into the video. In the second year after the Prophet migrated to Medina, a call was made. Not for war, not for conquest, but for justice. The Quraysh had taken the wealth of the Muslims, driven them from their homes in Makkah, and continued to mock the message of Islam. Prophet Muhammad heard that a Quraysh trade caravan led by Abu Sufyan was passing nearby, full of goods once stolen from the believers. He said to his companions, "Get ready, we will intercept the caravan." It was a chance to reclaim what was taken. Not just their wealth, but their dignity. The believers answered. They were not soldiers. They were farmers, shepherds, laborers. Many with no armor, few with swords, most with nothing but hearts filled with faith. Around 313 men gathered. Some rode camels, others walked under the sun. They didn't know what lay ahead, but Allah did. As they prepared, Allah revealed, "Indeed, Allah helped you at Badr when you were weak, so fear Allah that you may be grateful." Quran 3:1-23. They didn't yet understand the weight of what was coming. What they thought would be a simple interception would become one of the greatest battles in Islamic history. As the Muslims advanced, news reached the Quraysh in Makkah. "Muhammad wants to stop your caravan." The Quraysh leaders, proud, angry, and arrogant, saw this as a challenge, and they responded with fury. Over 1,000 of their best fighters marched out, heavily armed, carrying banners of war. Among them were men like Abu Jahl, who swore that he would crush the Muslims once and for all. The Prophet was informed, "The Quraysh army is coming." This was no longer a raid, it had become a war, and the Muslims were outnumbered more than 3 to 1. Some of the companions began to feel afraid. They had come prepared for a caravan, not for a clash with a mighty army. Doubts whispered in their hearts. But Allah saw their fear, and He reminded them through revelation. "And remember, O Muhammad, when Allah brought you out from your home for the battle in truth, while indeed a party among the believers were unwilling." Quran 8:5. Some hesitated. Their hearts were heavy, but they did not rebel. They trusted the messenger. They trusted Allah. They disputed with you concerning the truth after it had become clear, as if they were being driven toward death while they looked on. Quran 8:6. Yes, they were afraid, but fear did not stop them. They were human, and in that moment, their faith was tested, but Allah's plan was unfolding. And remember when Allah promised you one of the 2 groups, that it would be yours, and you wished that the unarmed one would be yours. But Allah intended to establish the truth by His words and to eliminate the disbelievers. Quran 8:7. The believers had hoped for the easy option, the caravan, not the army. But Allah wanted something greater. He wanted to show the world that truth is not won by numbers, but by sincerity. He wanted the Muslims to see that when they stand for justice, even when they are few, even when they are weak, He would be with them. They didn't go to fight, but war came to them, not by choice, but by decree. The Prophet gathered his companions. He stood before them not as a king, but as a servant of Allah. His voice was calm, but his words were full of power. He said, "By the one in whose hand is my soul, whoever fights today with patience, seeking reward from Allah, and is killed, will enter paradise." The companions felt the weight of his words, their eyes filled with tears. They were not alone. Allah was with them. This was not about victory or death. It was about standing firm when the test arrives. This was not a war for land or gold or pride. It was a moment where truth would meet falsehood and truth would rise. The first chapter of Badr was written, not in the dust of the battlefield, but in the trembling hearts that chose faith over fear. And as the Quraysh army approached, roaring with confidence, the sky above began to listen. The sun rose over the dry plains of Badr. The dust clung to the sandals of men who had not planned for war, only for justice. But now they stood on the edge of something far greater than themselves. The Muslims had only 313 men. Their armor was scarce. Only a handful had real swords. Some held sticks. Others shared a few shields. Their animals were few. Most walked, shoulder to shoulder, stepping forward with trembling hope. Across the valley, the Quraysh army thundered into position, 1,000 strong. Warriors in iron, swords polished, horses snorting, banners high. At their front were the most powerful men of Mecca, men who had spilled Muslim blood and sworn to wipe out the believers once and for all. From a worldly view, the Muslims had no chance. But this day was not in the hands of men. As the two sides inched closer, Allah gave the Prophet a dream the night before. In it, he saw the enemy, small in number, and it comforted his heart. When Allah showed them to you in your dream as few, had he shown them to you as many, you would have lost courage and fallen into dispute. But Allah saved you. Quran 8:43. The Prophet did not panic, and he did not fear. His heart was firm because Allah had shown him what he needed to see. That morning, as the two armies finally glimpsed one another across the valley, a strange feeling filled the hearts of the Muslims. The enemy looked fewer than expected, not because the Quraysh were truly few, but because Allah had made it appear that way. And when you met them, He made them appear few in your eyes and made you appear few in their eyes, so that Allah may bring about a matter already destined. Quran 8:44. Allah was preparing both sides, not for what they expected, but for what must come. The Muslims felt courage returning, their knees stopped shaking, their hands gripped tighter. Across the field, the Quraysh looked at the Muslims, and also saw only a small group. They laughed, they mocked. They told themselves, this will be easy, we'll crush them and return in glory. But they didn't know. They were walking into Allah's plan. The Prophet walked among his companions. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. He reminded them, stand firm. Paradise is waiting beneath the shadows of these swords. One companion, Umayr ibn al-Humam, heard that. He was eating dates. He said, all that stands between me and paradise is these few dates? And he threw them aside, drew his sword, and raced into the field, ready to die for truth. The tension rose. Dust swirled in the air. The Quraysh pounded drums. They beat their chests. They brought singers to chant victory before the fight even began. But the Muslims stood quiet, lips moving in remembrance, hearts crying to their Lord. Their prophet raised his hands toward the sky and whispered, O Allah, this is the army of your believers. They are few. If they fall today, no one will be left to worship you on earth. And still the enemy approached. Still the Muslims stood, not as warriors of this world, but as servants of the next. Then came a moment of silence. The wind slowed, the birds scattered. Even the earth seemed to hold its breath. On one side, armor, banners, and pride. On the other, hunger, dust, and faith. And yet, when the believers were not alone, they were outnumbered, yes, but their hearts were full, and their eyes, they no longer saw fear, because Allah had already begun the miracle, and the battlefield was ready to witness it. No night fell over Badr. The battlefield was quiet, but not at peace. The stars shimmered above, unaware of what the next day would bring. Beneath them, the Prophet stood alone in the darkness of his tent, while the camp around him rested in uneasy silence. But he could not sleep. He stepped outside, lifted his hands to the heavens, and began to weep. "O Allah," he whispered, "we are few. We are weak. We have nothing but you. If we are defeated tomorrow, there will be no one left on earth to carry your message." He cried until his cloak slipped from his shoulders. His hands trembled. His beard was soaked with tears. This was not fear. This was complete surrender. This was love, desperation, and trust. all rising to the sky. And then came the answer. When you sought help from your Lord, he responded, I will reinforce you with 1,000 angels, coming one after another. Quran 8:9. The heavens stirred. Far above the battlefield, the skies shifted. A wind swept across the plain, soft at first, then stronger. The air grew heavy. The stars seemed to move. The unseen world was awakening. Angels, and were coming. Not one, not 10, but thousands, dressed in divine armor, their faces bright like lightning, their wings stretching beyond what eyes could imagine. They descended silently, not in panic, but with purpose. An army of light sent not to test, but to fulfill a promise. And Allah made it naught but good news. And so your hearts would be at rest. Victory is only from Allah. Quran 80:10. Back in the camp, the companions stirred. They didn't see the angels, not yet, but something in the air changed. Fear began to fade. Peace settled in their chests. The anxiety that had gripped them started to loosen, as if an unseen hand touched their hearts and whispered, "You are not alone." And indeed, they weren't. The Prophet returned to his tent, calm now. He had seen the signs. His prayer had been answered. In the enemy camp, the Quraysh laughed around their fires, confident and loud. They sharpened swords, mocked the Muslims, and made plans for victory. But they didn't know what had already been decided above them. As the night crept toward dawn, the earth lay in suspense. The dust, the rocks, the trees, all of it was still, waiting. Because tomorrow would not just be a fight between two armies. It would be a meeting between heaven and earth. A day when angels would touch the ground, and those who had trusted in Allah would witness his promise unfold before their very eyes. The sun rose slowly over the field of Badr. The sky was quiet. The earth was still. But within the hearts of 113 believers, storms were raging. Their feet pressed into dry sand. Their eyes stared across the battlefield at a sea of armor. 1,000 Quraysh soldiers, standing tall, their horses snorting, their blades gleaming in the morning light. The Muslims had no banners, no war drums, no armor to shine. They only had dust on their faces and truth in their hearts. Then came silence, that terrible, heavy silence. And suddenly, the first arrow flew. It tore through the air like lightning, landing in the sand with a hiss. Then came another, and another. The battle had begun. The Muslims braced themselves. Swords were raised, shields lifted. Their bodies shook, but their hearts stood tall. And in that moment, the skies opened again. The angels descended, unseen by the Quraysh, but felt by the believers. Their wings moved without sound. Their presence swept across the battlefield like wind before a storm. And then came the divine command. When your Lord revealed to the angels, I am with you, so strengthen those who have believed. I will cast terror into the hearts of the disbelievers. So strike their necks and strike every fingertip of them. Quran 8:12. The enemy began to tremble. Their hands slipped from their swords. Their hearts raced. Their courage cracked like glass under pressure. Some turned pale. Others shouted in confusion. They saw no angels, but they felt something unnatural, something terrifying, as if the shadows themselves had turned against them. The Muslims surged forward, not with hatred, not with pride, but with certainty. They were not fighting alone. Every step they took was matched by wings beside them. Every sword swing carried a wind from the heavens. One Qurayshi warrior raised his blade to strike, but stumbled as if pulled by an invisible hand. Another ran straight into a sword he never saw. And among the chaos, the believers called out the name of Allah. Allahu Akbar! The voice of truth echoed louder than the enemy's drums. And then, the battle reached its heart. The Quraysh commander Abu Jahl, proud, defiant, and cruel, stood near the back, surrounded by his guards. He had sworn to kill the Prophet with his own hands. He had mocked Islam since the beginning. He called the Quran fairy tales of the past. But now his words were gone. His army was breaking. A group of young Muslims spotted him. With no fear in their eyes, they raced through the chaos. One struck his leg, another brought him down. Abu Jahl collapsed into the dirt, choking, bleeding, defeated. The man who called himself the Lord of the Valley, now begging for breath. Victory had begun, but it didn't come from numbers. It didn't come from strength. It came from Allah. That is because they opposed Allah and His Messenger. And whoever opposes Allah and His Messenger, indeed Allah is severe in punishment. Quran 8:13. The Quraysh were shattered. Their banners fell. Their leaders fell. Their pride shattered. Some tried to run, others dropped their weapons. The desert that once gave them confidence now offered them nothing but fear. The Muslims, though tired and wounded, kept moving. Not with anger, but with purpose. This was justice, not vengeance. That is yours, so taste it, and indeed for the disbelievers is the punishment of the fire. Quran 8:14. The battlefield was now silent again, but this silence was different. It was the silence after a storm. The angels had returned to the sky. The Quraysh had returned to Makkah, broken and humiliated, and the believers stood, bloodied, dusty, breathing heavily, but victorious. Their eyes searched the skies. They had seen no angels, but they felt them. And now they knew, beyond any doubt, that when Allah promises help, it will come. Even if the world is against you, even if your hands are shaking, even if you are only 113, the battlefield of Badr had fallen silent. Swords dropped from tired hands. The dust began to settle. The sun, now high in the sky, cast long shadows over the valley where truth had met falsehood, and truth had stood firm. All around, signs of victory were clear. The Quraysh had fled. Their commanders were gone. 70 of their men lay dead, including Abu Jahl, once the proud voice of arrogance. Another 70 were captured, now prisoners in the very land they had once mocked. And the Muslims? Only 14 had fallen, just 14, outnumbered more than 3-1. Yet they stood as the ones left breathing, left praying, left victorious. But before anyone could boast, before any head could rise in pride, Allah sent a reminder. You did not kill them, it was Allah who killed them. And you did not throw when you threw, but it was Allah who threw. Quran 8:17. The believers had fought, they had bled, but Allah wanted them to know, victory is not from your hands. Your sword may strike, but it is Allah who guides it. Your arrow may fly, but it is Allah who decides where it lands. Your feet may stand firm, but it is Allah who holds them steady. This was not a battle of strength, it was a battle of hearts, and it was a test they passed, not with armor or might, but with faith. Indeed, Allah gave you victory at Badr when you were weak, so fear Allah, that you may be grateful. Quran 3:123. They were not warriors by nature. They had no kings, no generals, no empire. They were poor, they were hunted, they were refugees. But they had something no enemy could measure: Iman, faith. And when the Prophet looked upon his companions, blood-streaked and exhausted, he did not praise their muscles or their tactics or their cleverness. He praised their trust in Allah. For that trust, Allah gave something no human army could earn. Is it not enough for you that your Lord should reinforce you with 3,000 angels sent down? Quran 3:124. Yes, and if you remain patient and conscious of Allah, your Lord will reinforce you with 5,000 angels, clearly marked. Quran 3:125. This was only the beginning. Badr was a signal to the Quraysh, to the Arabs, and to the world that this message would not be stopped, that even when the Muslims were weak, poor, and few, Allah was on their side. This was not just a military victory, it was a spiritual earthquake, and the aftershocks would echo across Arabia. When the Muslims returned to Medina, they didn't march with pride. They marched with tears in their eyes, for the friends they had lost, for the promise they had witnessed, for the truth that had been proven. not just on the tongue, but on the battlefield. The prisoners were treated with dignity. Some were freed after teaching others to read. Some were ransomed, but none were tortured. None were mocked. Because Islam doesn't seek revenge. It seeks justice. And at Badr, justice had been served by the command of Allah through the hands of His believers, carried on the wings of angels. The lesson of Badr is simple yet eternal. Victory does not come from numbers. Victory does not come from weapons. Victory comes from Allah. To those who believe, to those who are patient, and to those who never give up, even when the world says they should. And on that day, faith won. The dust of Badr had long settled, but the message never did. It wasn't just a battle, it was a lesson, written in blood, sealed by angels, and recorded forever in the Quran. What happened at Badr wasn't only for the people who fought there, it was for every generation that would come after, for anyone who would ever feel weak, outnumbered, or afraid to stand for truth. And so, Allah revealed the lasting guidance. O you who believe, when you meet a force in battle, be firm and remember Allah much, so that you may succeed. Quran 8:45. Victory is not in the sword, it is in the remembrance of Allah. He continued, and obey Allah and His Messenger, and do not dispute, or you will lose courage and your strength will leave you. Be patient, surely Allah is with the patient. Quran 8:46. The Muslims had stood firm that day, not because they were powerful, but because they were united. Their obedience to the Prophet, peace be upon him, their remembrance of Allah, and their patience were the real weapons of Badr. And that remains true. In every time and place, when falsehood rises, when believers feel small, when the world mocks what's right, Badr lives on. It teaches us that numbers don't decide truth, that Allah can change the course of history with one sincere prayer, that angels still respond when hearts are full of trust. What mattered at Badr was not the battlefield, it was the belief, and that belief made the weakest men stronger than armies. As the Prophet and his companions returned to Medina, they weren't just returning as victors, they were witnesses. They had witnessed the unseen become real, the promise of Allah unfold, and the impossible become possible. They had tasted fear, and then tasted victory. Not because they were warriors, but because they were believers. And so, Badr was written not just in the history of Islam, but in its heart. It is a reminder that when you stand for Allah, even if you stand alone, you are never truly alone, because the sky still opens, the angels still listen, and Allah always keeps His promise. This is the lesson of Badr, a lesson for all time.